Hello, folks. Another episode of Burning Platform. This time we're going to talk about a global HR payroll opportunity, challenge, etc. And I've got two great buddies, Pete and Brent here, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute. But, the whole world, I spent a month in India in March, and that's woke me up to how much change there is happening around the world, not just India, and BRICS, a lot of emerging economies. And of course, we know multinationals are going through a bunch of change with all the chaos in Ukraine and China and so on. So the world is changing pretty fast, and this is going to be a fascinating conversation on how do companies, emerging economies, and multinationals navigate the changing HR and payroll market to meet their global demands. Okay, Pete, why don't you kick it off? Introduce yourself. You're no stranger to the show, but spend a minute talking about yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Vinnie, and good to see Brent as well. So Pete Tiliakos, I'm a longtime industry analyst, known very well for my payroll work, EOR as well, or employer of record services. You talk about the globalization sort of element of things. Employer of record has really boomed and been a big piece of my work in the last few years. And then, of course, I'm doing a lot more in and around payments and fintech as well as a result of the work in payroll. Right, cross-border money movement is super hot, and also HCM technology. Right, I do a lot of work with the major platforms and providers and all the adjacencies that come with that. So again, longtime analyst and advisor. I'm the founder of GXT Advisors, and we are obviously an analyst firm that is focused on helping vendors, the vendor community and the buyer community to really come together and take advantage of HCM opportunities, right, to improve both sides of the buy and the product. So really happy to be here and excited to be talking about global payroll and globalization itself. It's been a wild ride in the last few years.
Thank you, Pete. Brent?
Well, thank you, Vinnie, for having me. I really appreciate it. And Pete, it's great seeing you again. We have an opportunity to talk every once in a while.
You don't have to be nice to Pete. You have to be nice to me.
I'm always very careful to be nice to Pete. Yes.
He's a hell of a guy.
He is a great guy. I'm Brent Skinner. I'm the co-founder of 360 Insights, where I lead the HCM practice. We're an industry analyst firm, research firm. Every industry analyst firm has, every boutique one anyway, has a sort of a unique focus or an area that they like to focus on. And ours is a real keen interest in learning as much about the enterprise buying process, decision-making process as possible. It's changed so much over the years. Obviously, going from on-premises to cloud that's an old story now, but it really has upended the decision-making process. It used to be IT running the bus. Now you have lots of stakeholders, line of business managers in HR. It might be, VP of HR or CHRO. You also see, the CFO involved. You see maybe chief operations officer involved, depending on where the HCM technology sits in the organization, what type of organization it is, and these sorts of things. And we write reports that help our readership understand what are the emerging best practices around us? How are internal champions sort of reconciling all those competing internal interests to reach a decision and implement something? My own background, and I promise to be short here, is it's pretty broad. I haven't been a practitioner in this space, but I've been on the vendor side a couple of times. About 10 years ago at Ceridian, around the time they acquired Dayforce, and more recently at Cornerstone On Demand, where I was involved in pre-sales, helping to support pre-sales pretty deeply. This is my second rodeo as an industry analyst. So I've been in the space for a while, writing about it, observing it. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Brent, you've done way more than Pete has, more than I have too. So
I don't know about that. Pete's really quite the go-to expert, I'd say, in payroll. But thank you.
Thanks for that, man.
Well, Pete, then I'll go to you. Let's talk about, you recently wrote about the UKG Emirates deal, talking about globalization. So tell the audience about that. And, what does it mean in terms of the overall? I mean, it's such a big market, right? So position it in terms of what does that mean? Is it a ripple in the pond, or is it a major impact on the market?
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for mentioning that. And if you're interested in the story for how we got here and why this is mattering, that blog is a great place to do that. But look, I think that this has been brewing for some time, right? Payroll has been neglected for a very long time. Let's just be honest, right? It's often just sort of looked at as this simple cost center that's down in the basement, just printing out checks, and it's also simple. And the reality of it is payroll is doing a magical job pulling the rabbit out of the hat every week with minimal, if any, investment, and really no, I would even argue, respect and ignorance around what they actually do and the value that they can provide. And so I think a lot of firms, if you think about business continuity and data recovery and all those things that are important to HR and all the data processing worlds, I think COVID really exposed a lot of firms' ability to manage payroll in-house when COVID happened. I think cross-border money movement got really difficult. Finding and knowing where all of having visibility, I guess I would say, into your workforce became very difficult. And payroll was holding a lot of that information and able to help with all of those things, but they weren't in a position technology-wise to be able to perform very well. And so I think it thrust payroll right into the forefront. And then you talk about the globalization element of this. The reality of it is not, it's no longer exclusive. Being a multinational firm is no longer exclusive to the biggest and most powerful sort of entities, right? These big companies is previously been what you thought of when you thought of an MNC. And now today, that's not the case. It's much more prevalent down market.
Yeah,
right.
Four people in different continents.
Yeah.
Company, right? Yeah.
Yeah, digitalization has really opened the doors for that, right? And firms are looking at opportunities to grow their brands, expand their footprints. But more importantly, I think what really pulled a lot of firms out into these new multinational footprints and these long tail footprints was the need to begin recruiting talent well beyond their own radius, right? You used to be you posted a job and anybody with any salt in their resume came within 100 miles and you were the employer of choice and you won. That's not really the case anymore, right? Talent is very scarce, skills are scarce, and just putting that posting up there and hoping for the best within your market is just not enough. And so now I think you see firms saying, hey, we're willing to go wherever the talent is and acquire that talent to bring them in to be the best and brightest, right? And so I think you've had this convergence of many different globalization sort of drivers that have brought employers to this point where they're managing global footprints and needing localized capabilities at scale. And they're needing that to remain agile and competitive and all of those things. And I think that's where HCM has really been pulled into this global payroll space where many of them maybe were looking to stay out of it. And so I could kind of go down on another rabbit hole around what's going on in HCM with this, but that's really why we've gotten to this point, I think, in a very quick nutshell.
To summarize for the audience, the UKG transaction.
Yeah.
Why is that a seminal point, I guess, in the evolution?
Yeah. Well, as you can imagine, I think most organizations in the past had bought their HCM and HR technology, often went ahead and just bought the same payroll that went with it, right? PeopleSoft, SAP, whatever you were buying, you were generally taking, particularly North America, right? You were taking that module with it. And that's certainly most likely still the case. But then once you left beyond those borders, right? Once you got beyond North America, it all started to really fall apart for some of those platforms, right? SAP, Oracle always had a fairly decent capability beyond borders. But Workday really didn't follow that model and only focused, solely on, say, UK or Ireland. And UKG, for example, again, only focused on North America. So all of your upmarket sort of platforms really didn't have a lot of capability to help you once you left the US. And so I think for UKG, you have to imagine they're not just a leading HCM provider. They're also really one of the most adopted workforce management, advanced scheduling capabilities on the planet. Right? They're big partners with ADP. They were big partners with SuccessFactors. So they have a very formidable WFM capability. But what they didn't have was any payroll capability that would go beyond North America. And that left a big gap for their customers. And the reason for that, I think that made it really attractive for them is they are very focused on their be the one mantra, which is be the single solution that organizations can address their needs from scheduling all the way to payments. And that's where I think coming together with their partner, which they were already very close with from an integration and a development perspective, bringing that in-house now gives them the chance to go to market with not just HCM and global payroll, but that really unique global workforce management capability and payroll capability that now says, hey, we can support you with the build to gross, which is often the most difficult part of payroll, getting the data ready for payroll. And now we can also help you with the gross to net in 160 or whatever countries, and to a single source. So that's a really compelling and differentiated market positioning and ability for them to now go and compete with many of their peers that have either continued to partner or have been very slow in developing their global payroll capabilities.
Brent, what are you seeing?
Yeah. So Pete's sharing a lot of really good information on this, and I agree with all of it. But just to put a fine point on a few things, yes, UKG is partnering with Amitis for a while before going to this. So you have to believe that this was obviously premeditated. They had a long-term strategy to sort of up level to get into that global payroll space, which has been that very difficult sort of barrier and impediment to a lot of the large HCM only suite players. There are a couple that are able to kind of act on a global on the global arena. Ceridian is one, ADP obviously is another. To see another one of those HCM only players really be able to break through, that really kind of upends the competitive landscape, in my opinion. And in a little bit, I'd like to get to a little bit around the Amitis, sort of the technology. From a 10,000, 50,000 foot view. We won't get into the granularities, but there's some real, I think, innovation and sort of groundbreaking stuff in there. I want to go back to something that Pete said earlier, though, around the sort of maybe the downtrodden payroll administrator that is this cost center stuck in the basement of the organization. Obviously, it's a metaphor, but it's true in a lot of places. And it's really interesting that so many organizations, I think we're going through an awakening right now where it's shifting, but so many organizations view the payroll as sort of an afterthought, even though it's mission critical. You get it wrong and you have a huge problem immediately. I think it was UKG that came out with statistics in the past couple of years where make one mistake with someone's payroll and they're already going to start considering a new job. But Pete and I actually chatted before this call last week just to kind of talk about what we're going to talk about. And if you imagine the movie Dirty Dancing with Patrick Swayze, don't put payroll professional in a corner, right? It's just kind of this funny way of looking at it. But somebody needs to be out there protecting and defending the payroll professional. And the fact that it's become this much more important with all this globalization happening, I think that's a good thing for the payroll professional themselves, because payroll, frankly, that is ground zero for the employee experience.
Pete, when he was talking about down in the basement, I presume with a bunch of timesheets or time cards, and the Wall Street Journal had an article recently, which I think it said when United became an airline, and they basically described their walkthrough of a ticket processing location.
Mm-hmm.
Billions and billions of pieces of paper from around the world. They were reconciling, did the passenger fly? Who do they owe money to? What airline did they exchange? And it just flashed before my mind when you talked about, because it's a dirty word, payroll, but God, you can't afford to get anything really wrong. So let's change gears. What is a multinational anymore? You alluded to, Pete, it's that a lot of younger companies are born global, right? They're no longer just in a certain town; they're spread all over the world. I'm seeing, I've been to 75 countries. I don't think I've seen as much movement as I've seen in the last 3 or 4 years. So companies are escaping inflation from certain countries like Argentina, right? They're moving operations over to other Latin American countries. They're rebalancing their supply chains. So they're de-emphasizing China and looking at Vietnam, looking at Central America for new production facilities. They are obviously they're being forced to leave places like Russia, right, with the Ukraine crisis and so on. I'd hate to be a multinational executive. I mean, the tension of moving that quickly, right? And you don't get much notice. You can't plan this over 5 years. This is like we got to do it in 3 months. Must be a very demanding also on the payroll and HR side, right? Because you can't just move things over and not have a people impact. So talk a little bit about what is the new challenge of being a multinational.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's complicated, right? It's not, once you start to go beyond, I mean, operating in America is like operating 52, countries if you count territories and Puerto Rico and such. But once you go beyond the US, you can't just force wherever you are into the US model and do things the way you did, right? And I think that more and more employers are, to your point, finding their way into these new locations, whether that's, and there's many use cases, right? Emerging markets are creating a lot of opportunities. There's a need for supply chain, re-rattling. There's certainly plenty of talent opportunities out there. And of course, just companies generally, I think, finding the M&A and other things are putting them in places they didn't plan on. And that long tail becomes really, it's clunky and it's difficult to maintain the right employee experience and have all of that data at your hands. And that data, right? The rich data that payroll is sitting on can be so powerful when it's activated. And that's what I think really the UKG and Amidas goal is here, is to simplify and decomplex, de-risk, if you will, global payroll operations, but then also give employers the access to that rich data at scale in a single point of contact where they can trust the information, get at it reliably, and enable the org agility that they need using their insights. And so I think that, payroll, Brent and I were talking about this off. Sorry, go ahead. Good.
I was going to just say, these are big vendors, right? You don't get a decision like that. You can't afford to say, I'm going to go with SAP, or I'm going to go with Northgate, which is, Allied now, which is, in many different countries too. But these are complex decisions. Just to make the decision takes months.
Yeah.
Is it better to keep doing work with outsourcing firms like ADP and Ceridian? Should you look at things like Papaya Global, small, nimble? Talk a little bit about how do you make these quick pivots?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think having a very nimble, agile, and scalable, infrastructure under you, right? We were talking about Brent and I were kind of analogizing payroll as if the company was a race car and you had the best talent, the best technology, best engine, right, best product. It can't corner very well if it has cheap tires and doesn't have really good handling ability. And I think that's a great analogy for payroll, right? You can have all the best stuff in the world, talent model, intention, strategy, you name it, but you sit it on a poorly performing payroll. And now it's going to be difficult to scale and pivot with the company and provide those insights that are needed. So I mean, I think that these are very big decisions because organizations are now waking up and saying, hey, we're not just a United States-based employer. We're a U.S. employer with a footprint in however many countries. We have a requirement to care and feed for those employees just like we do all of the rest of our workers, and we need to be doing it in the compliant way and be able to scale into those areas and tap into more of the opportunities that brought us there. And I think that's where they need the insights. They need the automation to move data and not be doing, these manual efforts and having payroll react without, the same level of innovation as the rest of the HR ecosystem. So it's important stuff. And getting it wrong comes with a lot of fines and penalties, right? Lost employees, angry, and just failed strategy. And I think that's where you've got to really start looking at payroll as a strategy, enabler and value outlet.
Brent, what would you see? What are you seeing in the global sphere?
So Obviously, there's a massively booming employer of record space right now. It's been a while. It's been around for a while. I believe around 10 years. Depending on who you speak to, I believe it's Globalization Partners that in earnest sort of started this space. But you have players like Omnipresent is one of them. You have the Niamos of the world going into EOR, the acronym for it, which is really interesting. Just accommodate, sort of drawing on their extant sort of expertise in long tail payroll, kind of leveraging that to become an EOR player as well, which obviously EOR encompassing more than just payroll. I want to go back to one thing that Pete was saying around that analogy of the race car. If you have cheap tires on there, right, you're it's like you won't be in a race car. And I think just to put a fine point on it, also looking at global payroll as just a technological thing to solve for. That's if you're looking at the tires as just a technology, then you're kind of going in the wrong direction. Not to take the analogy too far here, but in any event, it's that payroll professional, that strong payroll sort of professional team that's going to be able to use that technology and leverage it to its greatest potential. And also that global payroll provider has the services to back up to balance with the technology, so they're getting as much as you possibly can there. You know, if you're sort of if you're an MNC and you need real agility and maybe just starting out, moving into various different locations, it has to happen quickly, then maybe an EOR is your best bet for now. If you're looking to build really big in a few regions, maybe an EOR is the bridge to something else.
Brent, that's what puzzles me. You guys watch the market a lot closer than I do, but there are 150 plus countries, right? I can point to at least 20 countries that are growing 2 to 3 times as fast as the US market. Yeah, you can look at Indonesia, you can look at Nigeria, you can look at Brazil, you can look at every continent has a couple of those. Middle East is booming in a lot of ways. Why aren't we seeing more focus on specific territories? What is holding people back? It seems like people still want to chase after the US and EU market. Certainly huge markets, mature markets, but I'm surprised people aren't going after individual, at least 3 or 4 countries.
It is interesting that a lot of these sort of, sorry to interrupt, but you bring up something really intriguing, and I'm curious what Pete might have to say. But just to kind of just put it a little bit differently, it's interesting that, you know, in most of the most of these announcements, where you look at these players that can actually operate on a global payroll scale across, they say 160 countries, 20 different languages. It's sort of the catch-all. We can do all of this, but you don't see any of them really saying, okay, we can do it here in Indonesia. And really, at least I haven't seen that. Maybe it is out there and I've missed it, but I think that's a really good question. And it's maybe a messaging question for them.
I'm sure there are domestic solutions, right? Their corporations aren't doing it themselves. I don't think so. So I'm sure there are domestic players. It seems like a lot of the Western players just don't seem interested in those markets.
I think that you have to look at payroll as an absolutely huge market, right? In terms of the number of players and the types and the capabilities that you could tap into. You know, before we get to that, you had mentioned earlier about just managed services, right? I would say that managed services has become increasingly more adopted and more attractive, particularly for stepping into that innovation cycle that employers just can't fundamentally proliferate on their own, being able to get into all the infrastructure that they should be investing in, right? Cloud and analytics and AI and all these things, but also the service and sort of peace of mind, right? The de-risking of knowing you have a partner who is fundamentally doing this as their business, right? It's their product, right? Compliance and payroll processing. So I think you're seeing managed services considerably more attractive than ever. I want to say that somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 90% is what I'm hearing across most vendors that offer, either. And so I think the beauty of today's market is that you have more options and more ways of solving for that. And it's very modular and very flexible in that you can take just SaaS, or you can take fully managed, or you could take an EOR type situation that gives you the opportunity to quickly enter a market compliantly. And that modularity, I think, is giving organizations the ability to come to the table and say, hey, we don't have to rip and replace everything. We can bring in the pieces and parts that make sense for us, aggregate that to a single solution, single viewpoint, and a single data set, and we can gain all the things that we need, and certainly modernize our payroll environment. And I think that's one of the things that the UKG and Metis solution aims to do, is say, look, very agile, right? Very aggregator style. It didn't come with any engines. It was one thing that I thought they might have missed, but they say, look, UKG reiterated, that was not an engine play. It was more about the technology layer, being able to sit on top of a mix of partner-enabled ICP solutions, or the ones that you already have as a buyer, already integrated with your HCM. We can sit on that and normalize it within weeks and bring you to a single view globally. So to answer your question about why are there so many and how are they targeting, there are certainly global players that are targeting to do it all for you. And some of that is self-enabled and some of that is partner-enabled, and a mix. There are regional players who are very, very good and focused I advise several actually that are purely regional focused, Asia Pac, LATAM, whatever, and very happy to stay focused on that and work in partnership with the globals. And then, of course, you have very niche in-country partners who are fundamentally just focused on, like you said, a territory, a country, a couple of countries. And they all play in different ways in how they target the market. So there's a lot of different options for how you can solve this. And I think the modularity of it now, and the integrations and the APIs, and the way you can digest these solutions from SaaS all the way up to fully managed or more, is really giving you a way to digest that and complement your investments and not sort of rip and replace. So it's very refreshing, actually.
Yeah, as an analyst, I like churn.
Yeah.
I think on the global front, we're seeing a lot of churn. So that opens up a lot of opportunities. Brent, you close it out. What else do you see from an opportunity perspective? From a vendor perspective, why shouldn't they be salivating at all the opportunities?
Well, I don't know how well I'll be able to answer that question. I'll do my best, and I'm also going to perhaps jeopardize closing this out, because I'm going to bring something to that what you mentioned around the Metis piece, Pete. And my understanding is that the one view that they did launch late last year as Metis, and then later this year become UKG One View, married with all of that sophisticated scheduling that UKG is known for, which is great on the global scale. My understanding is that it can pull from any sort of payroll in any region, and it puts it into one view for the payroll people. And so maybe I don't know if that has something this is where I'm kind of reaching the limits of my understanding, frankly, of how the innards of how payroll works. But I think that has something to do with the engines piece. And Pete, feel free to say, hey, man, you're completely off on that.
No, that's what I was saying.
That's happening in other software markets too, right? Workday uses Prism Analytics to hoover in data from a whole bunch of operational systems, so they don't necessarily have to be the transaction processor. They can merge data from multiple sources. Same thing with payroll, right? You don't have to process it. You can pull it in from third-party sources.
Yeah, that's the speed and agility I was kind of getting at around their aggregator capability, right? Because they're not married to any one thing, right? They can integrate your ICPs, they can bring their marketplace partners together and help manage those services. So yeah, very flexible, very fast to market, available in weeks versus months, right? And phases. So yeah, very agile play by UKG, and it really gives them the ability to now support those global customers in-house. It's really, really beautiful move by them.
Well, Brent, I'm still going to give you a chance to close it out.
Well, let me kind of try to put a nice bow on this conversation.
Hey, there you go.
I think that any organization that's looking to, big or small, as we've already established here in this conversation, that's looking to become a multinational corporation, an MNC, you have an opportunity, or there's an opportunity or a potential pitfall here, right? There's huge opportunity to really go out there and present yourself in the best way possible to your newest potential employees, new hires, by getting it right. Or you can kind of falter and perhaps lose out to the competition in the war for talent. Just kind of going back to what Pete was saying at the beginning of this conversation, some of the drivers of, we have all the sort of the traditional legacy drivers of global expansion, but we also have the advent of work from anywhere, and also the how that has sort of helped in terms of the war for talent, for kind of organizations to go out there and hire the people, the best potential new talent that they can, because they have a much wider net that they can cast because of all these different solutions available to them. So I would say to any organization that's looking to expand globally, make sure you do your due diligence. Don't just kind of go into it thinking you're going to do it alone. That's gonna, they'll turn into a nightmare, and at some point you'll have to fix what you built. Go out there, do the due diligence, figure out, do you need an EOR? Do you need managed services? Do you need a technological solution specifically? And move forward methodically and deliberately, so that you can that's really the tip of the spear of your employer brand. You have to get it right. So that's my advice to any organization today.
Thank you, guys. It's been educational for me. I'm walking away with the feeling that companies have a lot more choice than I thought that they had. EORs, managed services, buying a SaaS solution. So it's a question of, I think companies are going to be looking for a lot more flexibility, a lot more churn, as I call it, in the global presence. So flexibility is going to be a huge driver for decisions. Pete, Brent, fantastic. Thank you so much. And we'll have you back for another episode in a few months. We'll talk about, we'll pick a different topic.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Maybe a little more controversial topic.
Yeah. We'll have to give it some thought. Thank you so much for having me.
Yep. Thank you, Vinnie.
Thank you.